Good evening and welcome to our August Meet the Author interview. I'm Rick Meredith, the president of Capital Crimes. We are so pleased to have our friend Laura Jensen Walker here with us tonight to discuss her latest novel, The Postmistress of Puddlington. Laura will be interviewed by Myra Jolivet, but I'll introduce Myra. But before I do, let me go over some of our upcoming events. This Friday, August 14th, we'll have an exciting tour of the Old Sacramento Underground with the Sacramento History Museum. This should be great fun to learn more about our local history. The tour will be limited to 20 members, and the registration, I think, is still open. Is that right, Chris? Oh, she's muted out.
Yes.
Yeah, still open because we maybe get some more people in there. And we're also getting a discount. Coincidentally, later in the day, Ellen Byron will be coming up from Los Angeles to launch her new book, All Aboard for Murder, at the History Museum at 5:30. And it'll be my turn to be the interviewer, so I hope you all can make it. That's 5:30 at the Sacramento History Museum in Old Sacramento. On the next day, Saturday, August 15th, our members meeting speaker is attorney and retired South Carolina State Senator Richard Harpootlian. His talk is entitled Facing Evil, Writing the Haunting Story of a Serial Killer. Richard was on the defense team for Donald Pee Wee Gaskin. He was also a defense attorney for Alex Murdaugh and recently represented Hunter Biden in his defamation case. We may need a few more hours for all of Richard's stories, and if you haven't already signed up, please do so. On Sunday, September 13th, we will have a crime time get-together at Crawford's Books in Sacramento. And then on Saturday, September 19th, our guest speaker at the members meeting will be Krista Sukup of the Blue Cottage Agency to discuss creating a killer author brand. I think she does marketing for authors, and Dwight is one of her clients, I believe. And next one is not a Capital Crimes event, but our member Carl Henwood is hosting a weekend writing retreat at his scenic Henwood Ranch from the 8th to the 11th of October. Carl's hosted our weapons training up there on his ranch several times before, but now he's keeping it to a writing weekend. Check the rap sheet for the registration information and also our full calendar of other events. Now, let me now ask you to mute your audio and turn off the video for the presentation. If you missed something, we are recording Laura's interview, and it'll be on the YouTube channel in about a week. And if you have any questions, put them in chat, and we'll compile them for the Q&A. It is now my pleasure to introduce our interviewer, Myra Jolivet. Myra began as a TV anchor and reporter. She filed early reports on the Space Shuttle Challenger tragedy for CBS News. She also created Emmy award-winning special investigations and covered true crime. She represented big oil, politicians, and nonprofits as a communication strategist and spokesperson. Myra eventually decided to blend those experiences into her love of traditional mysteries. Her amateur sleuths are California natives with unique and humorous Louisiana Creole roots. Two of her books are at the UC Bancroft Library, the local authors collection. Myra is on the board of Capital Crimes and serves as membership and DEIJB committees of Sisters in Crime National. With that, Myra, let me turn the floor over to you.
All righty. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you so much. We're going to have a wonderful visit with Laura Jensen Walker. And first, let me tell you about her. She's an award-winning author of more than 20 books, including the Amazon best-selling Agatha-nominated Murder Most Sweet and the Lefty-nominated Death of a Flying Nightingale. She writes in a variety of genres and lives here in Sacramento with her family, where she drinks tea and dreams of England. Her World War II historical, The Postmistress of Puddlington, was released this month, and her women's fiction debut of The Pilgrimage of Primrose Honeychurch comes out in October. Now, how many times do we have somebody who has two books coming out within months of each other? So we'll talk more about that as well. But first, let's visit with Laura. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming on to Meet the Author. And let's start by telling us about your writing journey. How did all this start for you?
Okay. Do you want to hear from the very beginning or just from my fiction?
We've had everything from somebody going from first grade to the first year of college. Take it away the way that you'd like to.
Okay. So very briefly, I was a journalist. I used to be a reporter for the Sacramento Bee Neighbors section. But my very first book, I started with humorous nonfiction. My first book that came out in 97, so almost 30 years ago, was called Dated Jekyll, Married Hyde. And my husband came up with the title. Not that I'm a monster, except for when we went camping. But so I did 10 nonfiction books. And then my first novel was Chicklet. And that came out in 2005, I believe, called Dreaming in Black and White. I wrote 7 Chicklet novels. And then I took a break and worked for the state of California because the royalties had dried up and we needed a new roof and I needed a regular paycheck. But then I came back and a good friend of mine said, you should write cozy mysteries because you love England and tea and everything cozy. So I did. And much to my surprise, I said actually, oh no, I could never write a mystery because I don't. It's all about plot, and I'm a pantser, not a plotter. So I did not think I could write mysteries, and I was wrong. My debut, Murder Most Sweet, was nominated for an Agatha, so I guess I can. And then a few more followed, and then I've always loved historical fiction, so I did that, and it just Katrina McPherson calls me a genre butterfly because I flit from one genre to the next. And for me, it's all about the characters. Wherever the characters grab me, whatever time frame, whatever genre, I follow.
So you're open with it and you go with the flow. That's amazing. And so what inspired specifically the Postmistress of Puddlington?
Okay, well, many years ago, in a galaxy far away, uh, I joined the Air Force out of high school, and I was stationed in England. And while I was stationed there, so this is the late 70s, I'm showing my age. Back then, the way we communicated with everybody was through letters. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have email. So, every GI would rush to the post office after they got off work on base. Is there a letter from home? Is there a letter from home? And I wanted, at that point, I was 19 years old, and I thought someday I would like to write a book. If I ever get to become an author, because it was just a dream, a far off dream then, I want to write about a young woman in the military and show her adventures through letters home. So that was just a little wisp of idea that I had almost 50 years ago. And then as time went on, of course, I got older and I thought, oh, I don't want the main character to be a young woman. I want her more middle aged. So then that came the Postmistress. But it's basically, 5 women on the home front of varying ages. And there is still a young woman in the military, Nora, and we see her letters, and she's half American and half British. But I'm a confirmed Anglophile. When I was stationed in England, I fell head over heels for the country and everything about it. So I love to write stories set there.
That's
And
all.
then Puddlington was born. And I actually, in the early days of the pandemic is when I started working on it. Because remember in the beginning of lockdown when it was so terrifying, when we did not know, we didn't know enough about it. We didn't know what was causing it. And we were in lockdown and it kind of triggered some latent PTSD I had, which I didn't even know I had. And
Wow.
I just was terrified to leave my house. And everybody there was all this, misinformation. People were not acting right. And I said, I need to escape to a time and place where people did the right thing. And so I went to my beloved England and went there. And in World War II, everybody closed their blackout curtains. Everybody followed the rules. Everybody, they built victory. They worked together in community. And that was my safe place during those early days of lockdown.
So as a genre butterfly, I'm going to borrow that from Katrina. What are the unique challenges when you dip into historical fiction? What are the unique challenges versus when you write something more contemporary?
Because there's so much more research involved. Now, I love research, and when I worked for the state, I was a research writer actually. But also for me, because of my journalism background, when I was working on, I actually wrote this Postmistress of Puddlington before I wrote Death of a Flying Nightingale, but that one got published first. But when I started doing my research, I was just fascinated by that time of World War II England. And I had all this information, but my very first draft, I showed it to a dear friend and an editor, and she said, honey, I love you, but this reads like nonfiction. You are including every detail about the war, and it's a story, it's a novel. The story is king. So the journalist in me was like fascinated by every aspect. Let me tell about this battle. Let me tell about this. And it's like, no, let me dial it back and let's get it into the characters. So that was a challenge for me at first, but once I realized that, it was like, okay, just go for it. And the writing just flowed.
Well, let me read a little, let me read the blurb about Postmistress of Puddlington. And I have to tell you, your alliteration is really, it's in play tonight with these books. So the Postmistress of Puddlington, with each letter, a life is changed. Courage, love, and survival, it's all in a letter. 1934 Dorset. Nothing gives Postmistress Hester Smith greater joy than cycling through the idyllic village of Puddlington, delivering the mail to her neighbors. Bookish Hester has always felt privileged to witness the highs and lows a single letter can bring. But when war comes to Puddlington's shores 5 years later, Hester suddenly finds herself in the devastating position of delivering news that no one should hear. As the community is directly impacted by tragedy on the battlefield and a shocking death occurs in the village, Hester's spirit and resolve are tested like never before. Can she and her fellow Puddlington women, including the vicar's wife and the bohemian lady of the manor, find the courage to face their darkest times and come through a storm that will change their lives forever? Now, with that, is there a favorite paragraph from the book that you would like to read to us?
Yeah, when you told me you were going to ask that, I thought, oh my gosh, what? So I did go through. It's going to be, because there's a little dialogue, it's a couple paragraphs, but that's short. So I will go ahead and read this. Okay. Hang on just a second. Okay. So this is much later in the book. It comes in the last fourth of the book. At Trimble's, now Trimble's is the village shop. At Trimble's, and this was D-Day. This was just D-Day is today. At Trimble, several of the villagers queued up, chatting excitedly as they waited to get their rations. Mary Robbins stood in front of Hester, nervously fingering her ration book, clearly worried about Ned. Hester wanted to tell her friend that her son would be fine, but how could she know that? Silence was better than hollow reassurances. Hester squeezed Mary's shoulder as the queue moved forward. As the vicar's wife approached the counter, Florrie said, well, they've begun at last. There'll be some lads slaughtered by now. Mary gasped, as did several others. You shut your gob, Florrie Trimble, Ethel Meacham said. Without thinking, Hester stepped forward and slapped Florrie in the face. Hester was going to not let that shopkeeper, who's just the worst character in the book, get away with that garbage.
Yeah, Hester surprised me because I thought, oh, she rides a bike, she delivers
Yeah.
the mail, she's and she's like, whack. Is that all right?
Yep.
I like her. So now let's start at the beginning, because you did something at the top, at the very
Yeah.
beginning of the book, that was different, but I thought was really cool. So not only did you give us terminology, but you also, it's like when you sit down at a play and you open up the playbill and there's the cast of characters. Was that your idea? And if so, why'd you do that?
Yes, I did do that because there's a lot of characters in this book. And my husband always says to me when he's reading a book, I can't keep track of all the people. So he makes his own cast of characters. So I thought, well, I'm going to do that from the very beginning. And because we have, there's all classes. There's the lady of the manor, then there's her staff, there's the cook and there's the butler, and there's, kind of a Downton Abbey back then, but she's got a skeleton staff. So I wanted to show the different people. There's Hester, there's the vicar's wife, the vicar's daughter. There's just a lot of people, and I didn't want people to be confused. So not only did I say their names, I gave who they were and, how they related to one another.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Sometimes in a story or in movies or whatever, a letter is just another piece of information or part of the story. But in your writing, you remind us of the whole power and place of written communication, because the letters and Hester's journaling, the way I took it, they actually move the story forward. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, I wanted to, there's that whole thing as authors, show, don't tell. So, but because this is a semi-epistolary novel, it's not all letters, but there are letters running throughout. that was a way that I wanted to show the reader, okay, as she's writing to her boyfriend who flies Spitfires, what's going on. But of course, there was also census. You couldn't know all that information. But I wanted people to get the real feel of what was World War II life like. And then
Mhm.
having Hester keep a wartime journal, I came up with that idea when I was in my research. There were back in England in World War II, there was what was called a mass observation project, where the government tapped many just ordinary citizens and asked them to keep a daily journal of the war, so they could see what things were like. And I was able to order online two different journals from two different women, a shopkeeper in Yorkshire and then another woman in another part of the country. And so reading those diaries, I thought, oh, let me have Hester do that. And then she can be commenting on what's going on in the village. So I loved doing that. That was a joy to do that.
Yeah. A few years ago, well, before my aunt passed, at 102, she got her Rosie the Riveter certificate. We pulled that together, and it was such a proud moment. And we try not to forget about Rosie the Riveters. Now, you brought us the Land Girls. Tell us who they were.
Okay. So land girls were part of the Women's Land Army. And what they did is they replaced the male farm workers who had gone off to work. So these were women from all over. Some of them were from London, had never been to the country in their lives, had never worked in the country, and so they were critical to increasing the UK's food production. So they plowed fields, they planted crops, they got rid of rats. Oh, that was gross. I can't stand rats. So that was gross to find out that they actually had to, kill rats and go and collect them and get rid of them. But they did whatever, they drove tractors. So they did things they had never done before, but they were essential to the food production at the time. And the men were gone off to war. So the women stepped up.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. We mentioned the fact that you have another book coming out in October. First, and that's The Pilgrimage of Primrose Honeychurch. See, there's that alliteration that you that you got me doing tonight. So that's coming out in October. How in the world do you end up with two books coming out within months of each other?
Well, Primrose, I mean, the first Puddlington, I wrote 5 years ago.
Yeah.
No, it's 6 years now. It's because we're in 2020. I wrote it in 2020, and my then agent tried to sell it and wasn't able to. So I set it aside and then I worked on other stuff. And actually, Myra, and I forgot to tell you this when we chatted earlier,
Mhm.
I actually have a total of 4 books coming out this year. Not that I'm trying to brag or anything. It just worked that out that way. So
Yeah.
my cozy mystery, The Alphabet Sleuths, came out in February. And then, then came Postmistress of Puddlington. And then The Pilgrimage of Primrose Honeychurch, that's a new publisher, Lake Union. That's October. They wanted it out this year, and they actually could do things much quicker, faster than some other publishers, which was great because I turned it in, I think, last December, and it's coming out in October. And then the next month in November, I have a book called Comfort for Those Who Grieve. And it's a nonfiction book on grieving that I wrote after several people in my life in a short period of time died. So it's just, and I didn't write them all in the last year. They were staggered, but just publishing, it just happened
Yeah.
that way. So
When
I probably will never have 4 books in one year again, but so I think 2026 is my year.
it is, it is. So tell us about Pilgrimage of Primrose
Okay.
Honey.
Um, as I call it, those are my two double P books. And I didn't plan that. It's like, oh my gosh, they both have two P's. So Primrose is a 70-year-old curmudgeon who prefers books to people.
Mhm.
She's very loosely based on me, very loosely because I am not a curmudgeon usually. But she lives in Las Vegas, and her mother died 3 years ago, and she's on her own. But she's always been very timid and fearful. She had an abusive upbringing with a dreadful father, but she finally decides, and all of her life, or from not all of her life, but for many years, her mother is from Cornwall, and her mother wanted them to go back to Cornwall, and her husband never would. He didn't like England. So after he died, the mom said, let's try, but then the mom got Alzheimer's and sick and couldn't. So now Primrose is now facing some crises of her own and thinks, I need to just go for it if I don't do it now. But it wasn't just Cornwall. She wants to go. It's called Hay on Wye, and it's a legendary Welsh. It's called the Town of Books. And this is in Wales, and it has the single largest concentration of used bookstores in the world. And this place was created in the 70s from a local guy in town who started just buying up libraries and old things. And he wanted to make this a town of books. So there's like bookstores, a gazillion all over. And that has been my bucket list wish. I haven't been yet. I hope so. So I let Primrose go. And she goes there, and she's just not good with people, but she goes there and undergoes this transformative journey where she actually learns during the journey that she's neurodivergent, which, by the way, the reason I started writing Primrose is 3 years ago when I was 67, I found out I was. And I didn't even know what neurodivergent meant. It's like, what? And then I looked it up, and it means somebody whose brain behaves differently than a typical brain. And I thought, and when I read what it was, sometimes people who are neurodivergent are on the autism spectrum, not always, but they can have things like sensory issues. Like for me, food textures. There are certain food textures I cannot eat and cannot abide. Beans, for instance, peas. There's just certain things, sensory things like tags scratching the back of your neck. To crowded places, it's just like, and you want to fight or flight. So to find out that there was and I always thought it was kind of weird, and then I'm terrible at math and technology. And it's like, and then I found out there's this thing called dyscalculia, which means math dyslexia. And it's like, oh, so finally at 67, I found I'm not stupid. My brain works differently. It's like, I knew I wasn't stupid because I can write and I've written a bunch of books, but I can't do math. No matter how hard I try. And technology, I just pull up my hair. But it's like, and then all these other things, these odd duck characteristics. So I thought, I want to write a story of a woman who doesn't know she has this and doesn't, but she's, this way. And then I just made her a little more prickly with people. I think I do well with people. She does not. So I just thought, oh, I want to tell the story of this woman who doesn't know why she was this, and then has this journey of discovery which transforms her life.
Wow.
So that's Primrose.
Yeah, that's cool. And so, you said earlier that you're definitely a pantser, but you sound plotty-ish. I'm going to make up a word. You sound plotty-ish to me. But no, tell us, okay, plotter, pantser, you say pantser, and tell us why.
Okay. I am very definitely a pantser. Because I don't like, to me, outlining is like, get thee behind me, Satan. I just cannot do that. I know some people who use spreadsheets and it's like, oh my gosh, I cannot do that. But I often, not always, when I start, even though I'm a pantser, I often have a good idea how the book is going to end. And then it's getting from the beginning to the end. So not always. With Primrose, I knew how it was going to end. And then with the Postmistress of Puddlington, I actually, there's 5 different women's stories that we keep going in and out of. But with Hester, the Postmistress, I knew from the beginning how it was going to end. And I actually wrote, and I wrote the epilogue at chapter 5. Because I knew I could just see it in my head. And I thought, I'm writing to this. So in that way, I guess that's a little bit of planning, but no, I'm totally a pantser every day. When I finish writing for the day, I would tell my husband, oh, guess what Hester did today? Because it's a mystery. And to me, it's a delight. And if I knew everything, my second novel, because the first one, my first chicklet, I rewrote it like 7 or 8 times. And my husband, who's very methodical, said, well, wouldn't it make life easier if you figured it all out and outlined and planned? And I thought, well, I don't know, maybe. And I tried, and it was a disaster. So it's like, nope, it works for me. So I write fast because I was a journalist and I'm used to deadlines. So I write very fast. So it doesn't matter if I write the book and rewrite it 6, 7, 8, 9 times because I'm fast. I'd rather do that than, to me, figuring it out and outlining, it will never work. So instead of getting annoyed about that or saying, oh, I'll try, why? It's like, you got to go with your strength. And my strength is a pantser.
So do you ever get to the point where maybe the characters' messages aren't coming through and it's hard to be a pantser when you're not hearing from your characters? What happens if, when you hit a wall? What happens when you feel like maybe I need to stop today? Or I don't know, what's your method? for
Well,
that?
there's a couple different things I do. Recently, I'm actually juggling two books right now at the moment. They're not contracted, so I can't really talk about them. But um, I was working on one that I was very excited about in the beginning. I've written like, I don't know, 8 chapters. I've got 13,000 words. And then I hit a wall. And I'm like, what the heck is going to happen next? What? And I was so frustrated. And I've learned not to force it. When you feel frustrated and you get to that point, you don't want to force the writing because then it's just crap. So I set that aside. But the other another book that I had been, had a little idea, had written a synopsis for my agent, that was tugging at me. And I went, oh, I kept getting ideas for that book. So I picked that up and I started working on that one. And it was like, and then the writing flowed. So I'm actually almost at 10,000 words on that book. But at other times, I'm not always juggling a couple books at a time, but sometimes I will just go out and go in the backyard with my dog, do some deadheading, do something else to get my mind out of it and just kind of breathe and relax. And, I let it sit for a couple days and then I come back to it. But one thing that a lot of, even though I'm excited that I have all these books coming out, I do want to say, so people know, I had 2 full years of rejection when I was trying to get an agent, more than 160 rejections over 3 different projects in 2 years. And so each time one project would get a ton of rejections, I'd go, okay, well, what I'm going to do, cry. And I would sometimes for an hour or so. And then I'd go, well, let's start the next book. And I just sit down and I started something new. And now all of those 3 books that were rejected are all out or coming out. So,
Oh,
but I had two dreadful, horrible, awful years of rejection.
yeah.
But I just refused to give up because I had stories to tell.
That's why, I was about to ask you if you had any lessons learned that you wanted to share, but it sounds like that might be it, unless you have some other
Yep.
words of wisdom. But your message there is don't give up, right? Just
Yeah,
keep.
never give up. Just keep trying. And again, if you get stuck on one, don't be I know everybody's different, but I know there are people that will work on one book for many, many, many years. And okay, that's fine. But, tell another story. Sometimes you just get too caught up in the one book. It's
Mm.
just like put it aside, start
Mhm.
something new.
Well,
So I think
now that, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. What?
I think we have more than one book in us, I think there's so many stories to be told. So just go for it.
Well, this is the time we want to open up the floor so everyone you can see in the chat some questions are accumulating. And I think, Chris, are you going to read the questions that we have coming in?
Yep.
Wonderful.
Sorry. We've got a few, so please, if you've got some questions, go ahead and put them in, and I'll keep checking for them. Laura, this is great. One was, do you have a cast of characters in all of your books?
No, I don't. Some of them, but sometimes there's not as many, and so I don't feel the need to do that. But yeah, in this case, in Puddlington, oh gosh, if I hadn't done that, it would be what? Who is this again? So no, I don't do that for all of them.
Great. Did you start doing some of your research for this book while you were in the Air Force in the
Well,
UK, or is it later?
well, not really, because that was nearly 50 years ago. So, and I didn't, it was just a little idea. However, I got out of the Air Force. I was stationed in England from 1977 to 1980. And then when I came back to the States, I didn't go back to England again until 2001 with my husband. It was our first trip. And actually, halfway through our trip, 9/11 happened. But,
Oh.
we have dear friends that live in Dorset and we visited them. And we've been like 3 or 4 times since over the years. And so I knew the Dorset area very well. And since it was locked down and I couldn't take another trip to England, I thought, well, I'm going to use this area that I really know. And in fact, there's a certain landmark in Dorset. It's called Corfe Castle, which my husband fell in love with. I mean, we were walking up to it's the ruins of an ancient castle. And he just said, oh my gosh, I feel like I've come home. And it was like, is this genetic memory? Because he has English background. And so every time we go there, we go to Cork Castle and we have tea from the tea room. We sit out on the castle grounds and have tea. And so that plays a couple important parts in the book. And so I just was able to draw on that and remember that. So
That's great. Have you ever thought, or have you done any kind of book launch in the UK? What kind of
oh
response
no,
are
but
you getting
gosh,
from those people?
I would love to do that. I would love to do that. That has not happened. When I wrote Death of a Flying Nightingale, and that's another historical, that was the first one published, and that's based on a group of real life women heroes in the Royal Air Force, and that they were called the Flying Nightingales. They were actually women nursing orderlies, and right after D-Day, they flew over to the beaches, the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy, to bring the wounded back, but the planes could not have the Red Cross emblem on them. And so they were shot at by the Germans. And actually, two of the women, their planes crashed and they died. They gave their lives. Well, so that was to me a fascinating story, but I couldn't go over there because, again, we were in the middle of the pandemic. So I managed to find there was a Facebook group of the Flying Nightingales. And while I was reading through, there was a woman who said, "Oh, my mom is still alive," because a lot of them had died already. And I thought, "Oh no, are there any left?" And she said, "Oh, my mom's still alive and she's 104 and living in Australia." So through
Wow.
that woman, I got to connect with her and email her mother questions, which sadly she died before the book came out, but I had sent an early copy to her daughter, so she read it aloud to her mom, so she got to see it. But I did not get to go to England, and I've had this invitation. There was somebody else that at one of the other airfields that gave me a lot of information, and they said, if you ever come, you have to come here. And there's a plaque in one of the airfields, because now the airfield is just gone. There's no trace of it, but there's a plaque that remains talking about the airfield. So that is on my bucket list. When I go to HAMY, I'm also going to go to back to the Cotswolds, and see the places I wrote about in Death of Flying Nightingale, because it was very real to me, but I wasn't there.
Well, this isn't a question, Laura, but maybe the Capital Crime should do a field trip with you.
That's right.
The tour guide. I'll be the tour guide.
I have friends in Derby. They say Derby, it's written like Derby, or they say Derby, it looks like Derby. Yeah,
Right, right.
I have friends there and family in London.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, let's see. Let me find the other one. Okay, Lorraine wants to know how you develop your characters. Do you create a profile for each one?
No. And this is another little thing. So one of the things that I learned early on is that there's no one right way to write. We're all different. Before I had written any novels, I kept going to writing conferences. And at one writing conferences, there was a best-selling author who'd written a gazillion books. And she said, "Oh, this is what you have to do. You cut out pictures from the magazines so you know who your character is going to look like, and you post them up. You have to know what's in their purse, what's inside their purse." And she had all these things that she did in creating her character. And I just thought, ew, I don't want to do that. That just didn't appeal to me, because again, that seemed more of a planning thing. And even though I'm a planner in my life, I have to-do lists out the wazoo. In my writing, I'm not. And so it's, a little hint of the character comes to me, and then it just develops. And I don't know, there's no rules, but some people say, "Oh no, all of my characters are totally fictional. I don't use," I have, there are tiny little bits of me in in several of the books I've written. Very small. It's like, no, that's not me, but this part of it is me. Like my first mystery, Murder Most Sweet. That woman, the opening line to that is, "I miss my breasts." Well, I'm a breast cancer survivor, and I've had 2 mastectomies. So that was the opening line for my cozy mystery character, which set it apart from other cozies. They're like, "Whoa." And at first some male editors were a little taken aback, but I know very well what it's like to go through life without breasts anymore. It's been quite a while, and it's fine. But that made it so I use that part of my life in that character. So there are bits from my life, but other people I know. One of the stories that I'm working on right now has little bits of my sister in there. Another has an old friend from my Air Force. So there's people, but again, it's not them. It's just aspects of them. But no, I do not do profiles. I just, again, I'm a very more spontaneous person, and it just kind of comes out. My husband once said, now this is going to be a little tacky. We wrote one book together. We will never write a book together in our life to save our marriage, but we did. And because he's very methodical, we swapped our first chapters. And when he looked at mine, my first draft, he was afraid to tell me how awful it was. And then he realized he had planned out in his mind all his chapters. He didn't. I said, he goes, it's like you show up and you throw up on the screen and then you pick out the best bits. That's what he said my writing is. So sorry, it's a little tacky, but that's kind of true.
It works. It works. That's great. Are you, speaking of characters, are you going to plan to bring your neurodivergent character back in another book?
No, that is a standalone book. That's a one and done, because that was her story was contained in the pages of that book. But I may have bits of a neurodivergent character in another one. So
In your throwing up part. Yeah.
yeah.
Dwight wants to know, he says, writing historical fiction, how important is it to get the facts right? And how do you do your research?
Okay. It's very important to get the facts right as much as possible. But of course, then there is poetic license. So I'll go back to Death of a Flying Nightingale. Because I was a woman in the military too, and these Royal Air Force women, they were stationed at a base not far from where I was based. And while I was there, I'd never heard of them. But I was so moved by their stories, and I wanted to shine a spotlight on them since history had overlooked them. So it was extremely important to me to know and to get it right and not to, screw it up. I really wanted to honor them. So in that instance, first of all, like I said, I was able to interview the last living Nightingale. As far as we know, she's the last alive one, or was. But I went online and I found out that there had been a book called A Nightingale Flew. And there was a woman, and she's actually the woman who keeps that Facebook page of the Flying Nightingales. And she had been in the RAF herself, but this was only like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And so she was able to interview some of the women, and so I ordered it from the UK, and it came, and it was more like a booklet. It was like 20 pages long, but it had interviews she'd done with these women and them telling the clothing they had to wear, what the uniform was like. And, just all those kind of things, which of course adds verisimilitude to it. But at the same time, there were times, and I will always put in an author's note, if I do something that's not like, sometimes you change the timeline slightly from what really was because to fit your story better. But I will say that I'll say, well, this actually happened. In fact, there's a book that I have on submission now that my agent has on submission, and in it I named the character after we all know the musical Hello Dolly, right? Well, that didn't come out. I don't even remember. I think it was the 60s that it was on Broadway. I can't remember. But there had been, so there's a thing in there. It's called the Harmonia Gardens Restaurant, where Dolly Levi makes her big She Returns, and she's at Harmonia. I love that name, Harmonia. And I thought that's a great character name. But my character was born before Hello Dolly. And I said that her parents had named her after. So what I found out was there was a play first by Thornton Wilder called The Matchmaker, and that came out in time. So I made a note of that in the book. I said, okay, yes, Hello Dolly was not around, but blah, blah, blah. So, it's sometimes you have to take a little poetic license to make it fit the story. But I try to be very much as accurate as possible, because when I read a book that is not accurate, it drives me crazy. Many years ago, as a woman in the Air Force, I read this sanitized version. It was clean fiction. It was called whatever. Anyway, I'm reading it, and there's like, pilots, and then one of the pilots crashed and died. And so they're at the officers club raising their glasses to their lost comrade. And they all raised glasses of 7-Up. I mean, seriously, 7-Up? You're not going to have booze? Come on. So I threw the book across the room. I was so disgusted. I was so annoyed. It's like, that is so not true.
But that's a good question. It came up at a conference, because at a certain point, what's fiction if we have to treat it like a news story? If we have to do a series of facts, well, then that's different than if we create a setting or take some truth. And you know what I mean? So that's a really good question that Dwight put on the table there, because I mean, I see things all the time in fiction where it's not like a real crime scene, or at least
Right.
not the way that I experience them. But I
Right.
say to myself, but once again, was it really that great a story, the one that I went to? It wouldn't have had the guts of a story.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. Good. Claire wants to know about the alphabet sleuths. You got any more coming?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I just finished the copy edits a few weeks ago on book 2. The working title, I believe they're going to keep it, is called A Case to Die For, DYE,
Oh,
because there's
cute.
a hairdresser involved. So that comes out in February. And currently, I don't know how much I can say. There will most likely be more in the near future. But I can't say much more than that. But definitely book 2 is coming out in February. So
Okay, I've got one from me. When you've got all of these different genres butterflying around, uh, how do you keep it straight?
sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't. I go back and I pick it up and I think, wait, where's the especially when I'm juggling two at the same time, I will get confused between the two. And I think, and once or twice I started writing like, no, wrong book. No, go over there. That's the other book. So that has been, but more so than that, like when I talk about them, since with my double P books, with the Postmistress of Puddlington and then the Pilgrimage of Primrose Honeychurch, even in emails to people, I say, oh, blah, blah, blah. And then I go, oh, no. I said, I'm sorry, wrong. I got the wrong double P book. So it's a little juggling and I get a little confused sometimes, but it all works out. So, and I have good editors, thankfully. But yeah, it does get confusing at times. And again, because I'm not a plotter and I don't have, I know that there are people who have little, sticky notes that they put, or index cards, or maybe they have the cast of characters written and they can refer to that. I will, we all have, I will be honest and confess, the thing that I am terrible at are timelines. Oh my gosh. It comes and bites me every time. I try to establish one and then I forget and then I go on. And then when my editor, gets the book, they go, oh, but how could this happen now? Because you already said such and such. And it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I suck at timelines, but thankfully they like the rest of it. So they work with me. But yeah, I mean, I know we all have our little weakness, but timelines are my weakness. Again, that neurodivergent thing, numbers, it's numbers. Doesn't work for me. It's a problem.
Do you use a writing app, or do you write in Google Docs, or where do you
No,
write?
okay, so I'm a Luddite of sorts. A good friend of mine said, you identify as a Luddite. That's how you identify. And it's like, yeah, that would be true. I, I'm very old school and I use Word. I've used Word, since I wrote my first book. Someone sent me something in Google Doc once, and I can't figure it out. It does not work for me. And Scrivener, I just give me a blank page in Word and I'm going to write. That's what I do. That's just, I'm very old school in my writing.
Penny wants to know if you've already, I think she came on a little late. I'm sorry, Penny. Did you already talk about Hay on Wye? Is it Y?
Yes,
Y-E?
yes. Hey on
Okay.
why. It's
Yeah.
it's a it's a town in Wales just across the border from England, and it is called the town of books because
There's
it has
used books.
the largest concentration of used bookstores anywhere in the world. And they have a huge literary festival every May called the Hay Festival. I would not go to the festival because there's thousands and thousands of people and I hate crowds. So when I go, it will be before the festival. So I can just go in all those beautiful bookstores and browse around and bring home gorgeous books.
It sounds good. Some of yours. Um, oh, Penny says, I want to die there.
I saw that. Yeah, me too.
Penny, don't plan ahead now.
Please don't say that.
I think that's what I've got so far, unless somebody else has got a question, please pop in.
Chris, you want to bring everyone back together then?
Sure.
Well, does anybody have a question they want to ask before we leave our Zoom?
That was fun, Laura.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. That was, and Myra, a great interview and great subject and so much fun. I really enjoyed that. And I want you to know if you missed anything, we will have this on our website in about a week on our YouTube page, and you can get that through on the website. And just again, a reminder, on Friday we're having our underground tour of Sacramento at starting at we have to meet there at 10:30, and it's about a 2-hour tour, walking tour, and it's underground, so it'll be nice and cool. That's what I understand anyway. And then later that evening we have the book launch of All Aboard for Murder with Ellen Byron. And then on Saturday, we have our members meeting with Richard Puddlington. So that's all I have. Anyone else have any questions? Well, then, great. Thanks very much again, Laura, for a wonderful presentation, and Myra for a great interview. And we'll see you all at our next event.
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye,
Thank you.
bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.